Hello and thank you for being here. This project is about how environments shape our behavior, which is one of the most fundamental questions of every architect in history. And I gave it this name because, from the point of view of conventional architecture, this approach to design may seem indirect, but in fact it paves the way for the most direct method imaginable. Let's draw an outline of this presentation first and then we will dive in. First things first, we will get familiar with some important terms, and the second step will be introducing the concept of evidence-based design. Next, we'll talk about enactivism, which is the theoretical platform that this thesis is built upon. Then we will see what sort of studies have been generated by applying the evidence-based approach to enactivism in architecture, namely the relationship between brain dynamics and architectural affordances. By exploring this crucial part of architecture research, we face a great gap of knowledge, which results in our question. In order to answer this question, we will investigate a newborn category of studies from the field of neuroscience. This newly acquired information helps us generate our hypotheses, manifesting itself as a proof of concept. Then we will talk about the design and testing a prototype to see if our hypothesis holds up. In the end, we will review the consequences of a successful prototype on the architectural research landscape. And finally, we will wrap it up by taking a quick look at the whole process. EEG is one of the several methods to monitor brain activities. It is a non-invasive method that records electrical activity on the scalp. ERP, on the other hand, is the measured brain response that is the direct result of a specific event. And we calculate ERPs by taking pieces of brain data that happened exactly after the stimulus onset from the continuous EEG and averaging them out. As you can see in the diagram, it will result in different ERP components happening with either positive or negative amplitudes with different strengths. They also happen at different times in different locations in the brain. MOBI, which stands for Mobile Brain Body Imaging, is an approach to investigate human brain activity, motor behavior, and other physiological data associated with cognitive processes that involve active behavior. And finally, SAM stands for Self-Assessment Mannequin, which is a non-verbal assessment technique for subjective evaluation of the emotional state. With this questionnaire, we can evaluate the amount of happiness, excitement, or dominance that we feel in a certain situation. Now let's talk about evidence-based design. This approach suggests that the best possible outcome can be achieved when the decision-making process is based on scientific research. And in this project, we try to look at issues through this lens. As you can see on the diagram, for architects, for example, the architect runs analysis on the user's behavior to anticipate what kind of behavior will be happening in the built environment, and the architect designs the environment based on that. And then afterwards, they run a post-occupancy evaluation to improve the design. Enactivism is now the primary position in cognitive science that argues the cognition rises through a dynamic interaction between an active organism and its environment. And I believe it is best explained by this quote. The environment can modulate the function of genes and ultimately the structure of our brain. Changes in the environment change the brain, therefore they change our behavior. In planning the environments in which we live, architectural design changes our brain and our behavior. So in order to improve architecture, we need to comprehend how we perceive it. And to achieve a truly evidence-based design, we need measurements. This thought brought me to a series of studies that explored the relationship between brain dynamics and architectural affordances. One of the most prominent examples are the projects done in the Berlin Mobile Brain Body Imaging Lab. And these studies prove that architectural affordances directly influence behavior, and we are able to observe traces and roots of these behaviors in brain activities. These studies mostly use EEG to capture brain dynamics because of its high temporal resolution and its ability to be portable. On the other hand, they mostly use VR to reimagine architectural affordances because it is highly controllable. We can repeat an exact experience over and over again. We can track body and eye movements, record neural activities while avoiding limitations of experimenting in real world. We have to keep in mind that these are the first steps towards building a knowledge base, and it is a relatively new approach to architectural research. But due to several reasons, this field is not explored as much as it should be. To name a few, the required equipment are not portable and also extremely expensive. They also need skilled staff to be operated, and they are not accessible to everyone. So the question is there a better way? In search for an answer to that question, I came upon commercial EEG devices that are mainly marketed for mindfulness and meditational purposes. But through different studies by people such as Professor Krigolson, I came to the understanding that these devices can be capable and they may be able to bridge the gap for us. On the other hand, recent advancements in the field of immersive technologies have brought us the Oculus Quest 2, which is more affordable than any other device in the market, delivers sufficient immersion, and most importantly can operate as a standalone device, meaning it won't need to be connected to a computer to run a virtual reality experience, which means more portability. So in light of these findings, our hypothesis was developed, which manifested itself in form of a proof of concept, meaning a combination of these instruments and theoretical notions can lead to a new toolbox, paving the way for researchers to conduct experiments much more easily and consequently contributing to our understanding of space. Now, this is the primary part of the presentation. Here, we will go through the design and testing a prototype to judge our hypotheses. The whole experience consists of two separate environments, the office and the design environment. The office is designed to be realistic to increase immersion, and the design environment is meant to be as simple, as neutral, and as empty as possible, and these two are connected through a portal. And we need an unobstructed 8 by 2 meter space to run the experiment. This process works in a cycle, and step by step based on two sets of data from SAM, subjective evaluation, and MOBI, the brain data builds up on itself. Inspired by studies on qualities of space, 4 basic architectural parameters are available to experiment on. We start the experience sitting on a chair in real world, as well as the virtual experience to increase immersion. Then continue by reading the provided instructions from the Notes menu. The architect's table in the middle is the control center of the whole experience. The screen provides additional information, and there's also a 1 to 20 architectural scale model on the round table to inspect the design options. We continue by selecting a parameter which activates the relevant menu on the tablet, then inspect the provided options. As you can see, 2 sets of information are available for each option. One scale model on the round table and technical information and measurements on the screen. And finally, heading to the design environment to run the experiment. The next step would be experiencing the design options and subjective emotional evaluation with the SAM questionnaire. When in the design environment, we can activate each option and familiarize ourselves with it on our own pace. Here the ground has a 50 by 50 centimeter grid to provide a sense of scale, and the first design option is the less enclosed room. Then we answer the SAM questionnaire to gather the first set of necessary data and move on to the next design option, which is the more enclosed row, and respectively answer to the same questions related to this option too. Now it's time to run the MOBI program while EEG data is simultaneously being recorded. This program makes one random option visible at a time, and each time for a random duration between 1 and 2 seconds. This randomization is to prevent formation of habitual patterns, so that we don't get used to a sequence of events and therefore increasing the validity of the brain data. Moreover, each option will be repeated at least 80 times, which results in a total number of trials being more than 160. In the middle of the screen, you can see the Mind Monitor application that we used to record EEG data from 4 electrodes of the Muse 2 headband. On the final step of the cycle, we'll be reviewing the results. In order to do so, we need to activate the respective menu, and it gives us access to several types of information. First, we have 2 sets of general information, such as amplitude spectrums and scalp maps. The amplitude spectrums show us if we have captured valuable brain data, or our data contains artifacts resulted by blinking or muscle movements. And scalp maps show the location of strong brain activities at different points of time. Then we move on to individual SAM and ERP results for each of our design options. Plus, we have the possibility to compare these two side by side. Here I'm not going to bore you with the scientific details of the experiment, but based on the results I could argue that it showed potential, and it was a successful experiment. Which means that in future it can be modified and employed as a research tool in the studies with a reasonable sample size to explore different aspects of human cognition and the built environment. The experience can also be streamlined by employing a non-linear design process and further developing the VR experience, as well as creating an open source plugin for EEG Lab to accompany the VR experience that enables architects to easily conduct experiments. A well-funded project also defined in a greater time span, and with expert assistance can enrich the knowledge base of architectural evidence-based design. Another opportunity would be improving the topographical and temporal resolution of the brain data using other commercial EEG alternatives. And on the VR side, we can go in the direction of affordability and accessibility instead of a higher quality of an immersive experience, and use Google Cardboard, for example, to potentially grant researchers access to EEG data from thousands of participants through smartphone applications. So to summarize, studying the inactive approach to architectural experience is crucial in understanding the relationship between environment and behavior. And despite its importance, it remains limited. We try to identify the reasons of these limitations and produce a solution. The proposed prototype proves to be promising for further development. And our technique greatly improved the portability, affordability, and ease of use to conduct brain research in architecture and all other fields of design. Thank you for watching.